Well, hello. How are you? Yes, I am the creepy Trivago guy. Don't I kind of look like him? I kind of look like him. I don't look like him. All right. Now I really don't look like the creepy Trivago guy. Yes, I'm Morning Guy Ty, and I'm known by many things. Tony V, the Boston comedian, calls me the man who's been fired by every radio station in Boston. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. I didn't work for all of them. Welcome to Radio Days, Fishtails 2019. I should tell you that the name Ty comes from the Latin for, no it doesn't, it's just my initials. It's my initials. They put me on the air next to another guy named Tom. Wait, there's a mysterious story just debunked, right? So I worked at WFNX in Lynn, which was a great station. Let's hear it for WFNX, the defunct. Yay! Where were you when we had rating books? Thank you very much. So now I'm the artist formerly known as Ty. But these days I do host a show on WUMB radio for UMass Boston. And I do support, thank you, and I do support ZoomX Radio in East Boston, where high school age kids are doing shows all the time. Radio alive and well. We have a great lineup of people for you tonight, and we're going to start with Chris Anderson. You might know Chris from his work at the Eastern Point Lit House, or maybe you've just seen him around town because he's always around town, right? He's back at Fishtails tonight for another rock and roll story, this time about radio. Chris Anderson.
Hey guys. Last time I told a story, I kind of ate the mic a little too much, so I'm going to try to back off a tiny bit, but I hope you can hear me. My name's Chris. I'm a music obsessive. I mean, it's almost all I ever think about. It's kind of weird. This really kind of started in the early 70s when my parents divorced, and we moved back to Texas, my mom and 5 kids. And I had to share a room with my older brother, Mike. Mike and I had a queen-size bed, and in the cubby of the bed, he had a little clock radio that he left on 24/7. And I would end up sometimes just bored, and I'd be laying around in there reading comic books, and then one day, I heard Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The cool lyrics, the quiet melody, and then they said, and the colored girls go, do, and do. Yeah, that's right, people. And then they did it, and it was like, everything changed for me. The world just was upside down. Cut to a few years later, I am in full music obsessive mode. I've got all the Cheap Trick records. I've got ELO records, Pink Floyd, all this just going 20. I'm just playing it over and over. And it's driving my mom a little nuts, as you can imagine. So every now and then, she would ask me to play something for her. So I put on a little Neil Diamond, a little Art Garfunkel, stuff like that. And she would, it was my first DJ gig. Yeah. Then when I was a teenager, I had a moment I'll always remember when we pulled my brother's clock radio out of the bedroom, and my brother Duke got an extension cord, and him and his music dealer, Tommy Jones, were listening out in the driveway to Rock and Roll Alternative, which was a radio show on KZEW in Dallas, Fort Worth. And George Gimmark was the host of that show, and he played punk and new wave and all the stuff that you just weren't hearing on the radio yet, including Gang of Four. Anybody? Hugo? Hi, Hugo. I went out and bought that record the next day. But the song I remember laying under those Texas stars and listening to that music was a song called Lights in the Night by Flash in the Pan. And I know you probably never heard of them, but go look the song up. It's quite beautiful. And it became the blueprint for everything, all the music I would make later on. Soon after that, I worked a little part-time at the doctor office my mom worked for, filing stuff, and I was able to put together enough money to buy a guitar and an amp. And then I started playing some music with my friend Eric, and we always had the idea that we were going to become a full-fledged band, but it never quite happened. But we wrote a lot of music in my garage, and we had a lot of fun. Then, cut a few years later, and I'm working in a bar, and I meet my friend Rex. And Rex is one of those guys that you see him, and he's just total charisma. And then he gives me this tape, and it's equal parts The Replacements and Van Morrison and The Who. And I was like, dude, you gotta put together a band. And he goes, okay, you're my guitarist. And that's how I learned to play the guitar, is by going on tour with the Shag Nasties. Unfortunately, our tour was sponsored by a major beer company, and we really liked beer, and it was a rough year. And after that, I left that band because it was just not sustainable. We'll say that. But that was when I first heard myself on the radio. George Gimark, who hosted the Rock and Roll Alternative, started his own radio station in Dallas called The Edge, one of many that would come later on. And he played us all the time. And it was really crazy to be able to be in my car and one of our songs would come on. And I was like, but this is where Lou Reed belongs. It was quite a moment. Anyway, after I left the Shag Nasties, I gave up music. I was going to go back to school and all that good stuff. And then I heard some more music on the radio, a lot of these really interesting European bands, and I bought another guitar. That's when I started another band, and we were called Transona 5. And once again, I'd never really heard us on the radio in Dallas because the radio market there kind of got weird. But when I moved to Boston, I heard us on the radio. I was driving down Sturo Drive, and it was, again, one of those moments that was just hard to believe. Eventually, that band kind of worked itself out, and I went and finished my master's degree, and I sold my guitar, and I had some beautiful children. And I'm really happy about that. Really happy about that. But I haven't been playing that much music. And so recently I started a side hustle working at Turtle Alley Chocolates here in Gloucester. Many of you probably know Hallie, and Hallie and I are both music obsessive, so it's pretty funny to watch us work together because all day we're just like, oh, what are this song? And we listen to Sirius XM, we listen to the radio all day long, sometimes ERS, sometimes The River, and it's just a glorious thing. But working there, I kind of noticed something. I needed some more music in my life. And so working with Hallie, I was able to put together a few extra bucks, and I bought myself a brand new Telecaster a couple months ago. And who knows, maybe you'll hear me on the radio. Thank you.
I like that. I like that. Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. So this time, you're going to be applauding probably when you hear many of the call letters that you have been listening to for your whole lives, most likely. And there are some real age ranges here tonight. I can see people here from 3 to 103. Am I right? It's a pretty good crowd. I'm serious. There's some youngsters and there's some oldsters. I dye this to look distinguished. It's not working. All right. The next storyteller for you tonight is Holly Harris, and there's going to be some call letters. There will be call letters. We share a radio station currently. Holly Harris's show is on WUMB, as is mine, but hers is on once a week. It's called Spinning the Blues. You'll find it on Saturday nights at 6. Holly has been involved with music forever, for ages. Introducing bands, the names of the artists that she's introduced from the stage are just, well, she'll probably tell you, not me. She hosted a show at Tufts Radio called The Morning After Blues, and that started her in this whole thing, okay? So now you get a commercial show on WCGY. Come on, give it up for that defunct radio station. CGY, we listen to CGY. And that was called 10 O'Clock Rock and Blues. Then came GBH, the monster. BOS, almost 15 years on WBOS, doing a blues show. Holly Harris, come on. She's an award winner, and she's here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, telling her story, Holly Harris.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I was wondering who that was about. Not really. It's just such a pleasure to be here. It really is. And as I was coming over here, I also have a Texas tail, by the way, so nice and fitting that I'm second. As I was coming over here, I was realizing, and all week, that I had really been on stage for a lot of years, but had never talked about myself. And I've always, introduced people and trotted off or talked about other, giving messages or sending musical messages. So this is kind of terrifying, but fun. And I was going to say, hold the tomatoes, like looking around from Shakespeare's days, but I'd say here, hold the organic tomatoes. It's kind of where I think we are. So my story comes from a time in the late 80s when I thought I was going to move to Austin, Texas. And it was during the People's Express airplane era when you could fly from Boston to Austin for $85. And I took advantage of that. And I decided I was going to move to Austin, Texas. So there's a famous club in Austin called Antone's, owned by the late Clifford Antone. And they had several blues festivals, and I thought, this is a great opportunity. I teach school in Salem, and I'll go for a couple of weeks either during a school vacation or in the summer. So I rented a motel room at Motel 6, and I should have probably gone to the north side of town, but I was on the south side of town, if you know Austin. And I also rented a typewriter, and I furiously typed things and brought over different cover letters to places, and I was hired. I actually got a job, which I did not take. So I ended up interviewing 3 different artists that I'm going to mention, and I walked around with my little Sony tape recorder, and the first fellow was a band member of Clifton Chenier, the famous King of Zydeco's band, and his name was Warren Cesar, and he wasn't a well-known member of the band. He was the accordion player. But we were fascinated, I was fascinated with the music, and he was fascinated that I came from Boston. And he also had a cooking show, because I love to cook. But he cooked raccoon and squirrel brains and really weird things in this show. And so one day I was interviewing, it was during this 2-week period, I was interviewing Clifton, and he brought me to the real Stubbs Barbecue. And if you go to like Trader Joe's or anywhere, you can see Stubbs Barbecue. Well, Stubbs was alive then, and a big tall man, and it was under the interstate, and he cooked this incredible meal. And it was something I'll always remember. And one of Clifton's last shows was in 1987, I believe, at Night Stage in Cambridge, so there was a Boston connection. And his son, CJ, is now the Prince of Zydeco and carrying on the Zydeco tradition. I'm sure there's Zydeco people in this house tonight. So the second person is Coco Taylor, and what a gracious woman. B.B. King was probably the most gracious musician I'd ever met, and also the first blues artist I ever heard. And Coco Taylor was the female counterpart. And so we were at Antone's club, the old club on Guadalupe, when Clifford Antone was there before he went to jail and had his troubles, if you know the history of Clifford and his club. But Coco and I, for some reason, decided we couldn't think of why didn't we go outside and set a time to meet. We said, let's just go to the ladies' room. Well, the men's room was here, and the ladies' room was here, and I didn't know the club. And she followed me clear into the men's room, and we just turned around because the whole band was in there. And we were like, oh, my goodness. And we just all burst into hysterics. And years later, I interviewed her when she came to Salem for the Salem Blues Festival, and she stayed at the famous Clipper Ship Inn, and she was still as gracious as ever. Her husband, Pops, was alive at the time, and her second husband's last name was Harris, and we kind of joked that maybe we were related. And the third person I want to mention is a famous guitar player named Mel Brown. And if you know guitar and you know Austin, he was part of the house band at Antone's. And Mel was incredible. He was just such a talent. And so Martin Sexton was on stage, and I was interviewing a little bit of Mel, and we had lunch with Clifford Antone that day. And I get a lot of station IDs. I have hundreds of station IDs, or, hi, this is so-and-so, this is B.B. King, I listen to Holly Harris on WGBH or whatever. So I go around, whether it's with my tape recorder or now with a Zoom, and get these IDs. Well, we did a great interview, but he wasn't happy with the ID portion. He said, I'll send you a tape, I promise. I said, okay. So I waited, and eventually I got a tape from Mel Brown. The entire side of the tape was Mel Brown. Hi, this is Mel Brown. Hi, this is Mel Brown. Hey, this is Mel Brown. An entire tape of Mel Brown. And I treasure it, and it was incredible. And it was a wonderful time. I didn't take that radio job because they wanted me, it wasn't going to be music, it was interviewing Texas politicians at the State House. And I would have had to also take the history of Texas. I said, okay, no. And I was engaged at the time, and I had a nice job here, and I thought, you know what? I had fun in Texas. People's Express is going to end anyway. I think I'll just come back. So I made the right decision. And speaking of decisions, you know, we all make decisions, and there's consequences. The 4 people that I mentioned tonight have all passed away. Probably the first guy from eating squirrel brains. But the rest have passed on. And I think it's so important to get out and hear your favorite artists. Get out and have that 360 experience. And that's what you all did tonight. You came, you made a decision to come, and you're having that 360 experience. And whether it's art or music or poetry or whatever it is, it's so important to support each other and support the arts. And I thank you so much for coming. And at the end of my show, on Saturday nights, I always say, get out and hear as much music as possible. Get out and hear as much blues as possible, and just absorb. So thank you for coming. Thanks.
I got to steal Holly's line just before the whole show started tonight, because I give you credit, because she said, I'm not used to talking about myself. In fact, I don't even tell my therapist about me. I talk about other people. Like, Holly, that's gold. It's gold. Thank you. So I'm going to do a little bit of name dropping. How's that? Because you do meet a lot of people, and you do interview a lot of people, and you get your photograph taken with a lot of people in radio. The people that are here that are on the air will vouch for that. Am I right? Oh, yeah. And it happens. It's great sometimes. Sometimes it's not so great. Sometimes you don't know how it's going to go. So Steven Van Zandt. Who knows Steven Van Zandt? I met him, and I said, you know what, dude? You're a triple threat. You're the kingpin of Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. You're also on The Sopranos, one of the greatest television shows of all time, and one of the most successful. And you got your own syndicated national radio show, 1, 2, 3. You're a triple threat. And he just started laughing. And I said, this guy's a good guy. So then we line up for a photograph, and I'm standing behind him. And I lean over and I go, hey, Steve, I brought a Sopranos soundtrack, and you better sign it. And he turns to me, and all of a sudden, his eyes meet mine, and that big Silvio Dante, Mafia, I've killed many, many people face is looking right at me, and he goes, I better. And I go, if you want. But he did sign it. So our next presenter tonight is John McElhenney, and he's a Fishtails fan, first-time storyteller. Let's give him a warm welcome. He knows the art of the spin. John?
Thanks for the nice introduction. I think what Ty's talking about is, I used to work in public relations and still work in communications, so that's what he's talking about there. But I first wanted to start out by offering my condolences tonight to the Celtics fans among us. It's been a tough week for those of us in Celtics Nation. Our team's out of the playoffs, and so I guess it's looking forward to next year. But I've been a Celtics fan for a long time, my whole life. And I remember I used to listen to the Celtics with my dad on the radio, actually. We were talking about some people in Boston radio, and I remember listening to Johnny Most, a longtime Celtics radio announcer, 40 years for the Celtics, famous. He had this gravelly, raspy voice. I'm not going to attempt to do it here, wouldn't do it justice. Yeah, we'd listen in the car, driving back from a Boy Scout meeting or a practice, my dad and me, and we'd be listening to the Celtics, and it'd be long stretches of silence, so besides Johnny Most, But my dad and I wouldn't talk a lot, so my dad didn't talk a lot. So it wasn't that he was angry or distant or mean or anything, he just didn't talk a lot. So if I'm being honest, now that I'm a dad, I think more about it, I think he just had trouble connecting with the four of us kids. He just started out a family when he was 21, was never affectionate, never told the kids that he loved us, never went to the movies or anything with us, never read books with us. It was just how he was. And I was thinking about it this week, and I remembered, I never remember getting a hug from my dad. So, not one time. I thought that was strange, and I just remembered it this week. But we had this routine that says a lot at nighttime. Before bed, every night, I'd go over to my mom, kiss her goodnight, and then I'd go over to my dad, and I'd shake his hand, and then we'd do high five, and then low five, and then we'd thumb wrestle until one of us won, and I went upstairs to bed. And so it was a really different upbringing, a different relationship with my dad. But one thing we did have was sports. So sports was our way of connecting, the sort of common ground we had together. I can remember him in his office, his home office, going through the day's work papers, just checking the ledgers from each day, with the Red Sox on TV, and I'd be in there sitting on the floor. We'd be watching the game, but in total silence, except for the game that was on TV. But every once in a while, there'd be a commercial or a break in the action, and I would ask him, I'd say, "Hey, Dad, who do you think's a better player, Craig Nettles or Butch Hobson?" Or I might say something like, "Hey, Dad, do you think Fred Lynn's going to go to the Hall of Fame?" And we'd talk for a couple of minutes, and it'd be nice, just the two of us talking about sports. And then silence again, comfortable though, but silence again. And then I'd walk upstairs when it was time for bed. He had this thing where he went on work trips. He'd go to Western Mass or upstate New York, just on 1 or 2 night trips, stay in a hotel. But every time he came back, he would bring back a USA Today sports section for me. It was pretty cool as a young sports fan. I could read about Steve Garvey or George Brett or these other players that we couldn't get in those pre-internet days, news about that much in our local newspaper. So it was cool to read about that as a young sports fan, but mostly it was kind of special because I knew he was bringing those back for me. He would come back in from his trip, open up his briefcase. I'd be on the couch or at the kitchen table. He'd put the sports section on the table in front of me without saying a word, and just go upstairs and change out of his work clothes in time for dinner. So we had that connection there. And I've been thinking about it, preparing for this, just thinking about him. And I could almost, now that I'm a dad, put myself in his shoes. And I can hear him or imagine him thinking, geez, I've got this awkward, this skinny, nerdy kid, and I don't know how to connect with him. I have no idea. But maybe, just maybe, sports will be a way. And those, he could never tell us he loved us, but those 2-day-old crumpled newspapers, those sports sections, were the hugs that he could never give us. I'm a dad myself now, but pretty different parenting style than my dad. No thumb wrestling, no handshakes at bedtime. Ari and I have 3 kids, 3 lovely kids. 2 boys and a girl, and there's lots of, my kids, they get sick of the hugs and the, love you at bedtime and all that stuff. So I think it's just a different time from the way my dad was a parent and brought us up. But we have a 13-year-old, and it's challenging times now with the 13-year-old. He's officially a teenager now, and he's going through those fits of anger and slamming bedroom doors and arguments over video games. It just seems like he's angry all the time, it seems like. There's always tension between us, and it makes me sad. I remember not that long ago, we'd have tickle and wrestling on the couch. We'd have, reading after dinner, sharing books, hugs before bedtime. I miss those days. Arya said not too long ago that this intense, sort of competitive, strong-willed boy is who he is. I've got to meet him halfway. I've got to meet him where he is, and sort of come to a common ground. And Arya's way better at the little things in life, like relationships with other humans. So I usually listen to what she says. And in this case, I did. I thought, well, let me try to find a common ground again. Let me try to sort of resurrect that relationship, find that common ground with my son again. And so I came back to a familiar place. We went to a Celtics game not too long ago, and we took the tee in, just him and me, ate giant pizza slices and drank Cokes, and snuck down from the nosebleed seats that we can afford to the ones that we can't on courtside. So I'm really teaching him good values. But it was a really nice time, and we've been watching basketball games together, through the playoffs, and so we're trying to resurrect, that bond. Some days it goes well, and other days it doesn't. Those arguments over big important things like, will you just pick up your laundry off the bedroom floor? And it's never about the laundry, is it? But we're trying, and so there are times, when there are good days, and for a while it's going really well. Sometimes we'll be coming back from a basketball game or an indoor soccer game in Danvers or Peabody, and we'll be in the car and the Celtics will be on. You can hear the squeak of the sneakers on the floor over the radio, and he'll ask things. There'll be silence for a while, but then after a few minutes, he'll ask something like, "Hey, Dad, who do you think's better, Kevin Durant or James Harden?" Then he'll say something like, "Do you think Jason Tatum will go to the Hall of Fame? What do you think, Dad?" And we'll talk for a couple minutes. Just a couple of guys talking about the game, talking about the player, talking about the season, and then there'll be comfortable silence again as we continue the drive home. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend, thank you. So, Mike Mullaney is our next speaker, and I remember when he was just that guy driving the van. Wow. Now he's run right over me and everybody else to the top. So Mike Mullaney is currently the Assistant Program Director and Music Director at Mix 104.1, one of America's most popular stations. And you know something? If you don't know what that person does in radio, the Assistant PD, he does what the PD doesn't do. The PD has the position and is fast asleep while that guy's getting the job done. I know. So Mike has been there for, like I said, 20 years, which is amazing. And he's also the proud host of a show called New England Lifestyles, which spotlights nonprofits. Mike came roaring out of Bridgewater State. Of course, he ran the radio station there, because that's what people like that do. They run the radio station wherever they are. You sensing a theme here? So then it was off to ZLX, BOS, and the River. Finally digging in at Mix, consistently picking hits better than his competitors, and hanging out with the biggest names in pop music. And I'm talking about up here for you young kids. The biggest names. Mike Mullaney, everybody.
I think he is overhyping me just a little bit, but I'm a very lucky guy. You know, I grew up in Boston. I'm probably one of the only people in the world who has been able to work his entire radio career in the town he grew up in, which is such a gift. I was the type of kid who, when I grew up, my dad was a professional singer. In 1959, he was on the Ed Sullivan Show. My sister was a performer too, and she was part of she was one of the original members of the cast of Zoom. So she won an Emmy Award. She was Mara. She'd say, "I'm Mara, charge," and she'd go through the letter O. So I was always around entertainers, so it was a fun thing. And my thing was I loved music, you know, I loved it. And I'll never forget the day I first heard Van Halen. It changed my life. So I wanted to be a singer in a band. And I ended up singing in a bunch of garage bands with terrible names, Forced Vengeance. I was the singer for Eden Exposed. That was a great band. Eventually, I realized I was not a great singer, but I loved to sing. I loved everything about music. And I figured out that there was a way to be around music, and that was to get into radio. And what a gift it's been. I've had the opportunity to really meet some of the great people in music. I mean, people you dream your whole life of running into. And my job as the music director, it's basically, I listen to music. I go to concerts. I interact with artists on the way up. And you meet people, and you see this crazy amount of talent, and you end up seeing them become huge stars. So it's really amazing for a guy like me. And the story I'm going to tell is somewhat similar to the story Ty told about Stevie from the E Street Band. You don't always stay on the right side of artists. Now, I've had great opportunities. I mean, I've been invited to Taylor Swift's house twice. What? Me? It's because she knows the power of radio and she wants to be on good terms with radio. By the way, Taylor, about this tall, 6 feet tall, always wears 4-inch heels too, so she looks like a goddess. She really does. Wonderful lady. But the story I'm going to tell you is the day that I ran afoul of an international superstar. And when I talk about a superstar, this person has sold over 100 million records, 11-time Grammy winner, and I think is the current reigning Grammy winner for Album, Song, and Record of the Year. This is the story of my running afoul of Bruno Mars. So we go back to October of 2014. Joe Riccatelli, who runs RCA Records, calls me and says, "I have a record I'm going to play for you. It's going to blow your mind." So I'm pretty excited. Joe brings it in, and he plays the song. And a bunch of the people in the room are like, "Yeah, it's okay." And in my mind, I'm like, what? This is the greatest song I've ever heard. The song was Uptown Funk. This is one of the greatest songs ever. It is a song which has 3.5 billion YouTube views. It just went over a billion Spotify streams. So he plays it for me, and I love this thing. And I'm a guy who likes social media. I live my life on social media a lot. My wife often says to me, "Is there anything you ever thought that you didn't say or tweet?" So as soon as he plays this for me, I'm pretty excited, and I run to my computer. And I jump on Twitter, and I'm a guy who's got, a decent amount. I don't have crazy amount of followers. I get about 500 followers at that time. And I write on Twitter, I say, "I just heard the new Mark Ronson, Bruno Mars song, and I can say without fear of hyperbole that it is the greatest song of all time." I think nothing of it. Now, nothing I've ever tweeted has ever gotten any more than like 10 retweets. I then go off and do some stuff in the studio. I get back, look at the post, and in less than an hour, it's been retweeted 577 times. I'm like, what? That's interesting. And one of the questions is someone says, "Describe the song." And I say, well, it sounds like The Time and James Brown in front of it with a wall of brass and Bruno positively wails. And next thing I know, it's been retweeted 600 times. I'm like, wow, look at me, Mr. Popular. 5 minutes later, Joe Riccatelli from the record company calls me and says, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He says, "This is a secret release. It's not being released for another month." Okay, so I'm a little panicked. I took down the tweets. But here's something interesting about Twitter. Once you tweet something, just because you delete it does not mean it goes away. Screen grabs everywhere. It didn't go well for me, and I was bummed out. But the cool thing is I got another 1,000 fans. Followers on Twitter, so cool. But then I realized that the Bruno community now is following me, asking me questions constantly. they keep tweeting at me, hey, when's his next release? And I don't know anything. Fast forward 2 years, and Bruno announces that he's going to be I was part of CBS at the time, I'm now part of Intercom. Bruno announces that he's going to be on our We Can Survive, which is a breast cancer charity concert in Los Angeles. Now, I know he's been working on something, so I tweet out, hey, Bruno Mars has just announced he's going to be part of the We Can Survive concert. And if I'm a betting man, I'd bet he'll have new music before he hits the stage. Just guessing, I don't know anything. And I think about it, and I go get a cup of coffee, and I get back and I say, you know something, I should probably take that down. The Bruno people are going to speculate like crazy. Before I can get to my Twitter account, phone rings. Andrea Ganis, the head of promotion for Atlantic Records. I just got off the phone with Bruno Mars' manager. What the hell are you doing? I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, you're leaking information. I said, what information? I don't know anything. They said, you know about this. You know about his single release, and you're getting it out there. He's not going to play the show now. And I'm like, oh, my God. Now I'm freaking out. And I realized that by the time I had taken it down, they had screen grabbed it and tweeted it everywhere. So I'm freaked out, and I take it down, and they say, do us a favor, stop tweeting about Bruno. I'm like, fine, I'm never going to do it again. But a month later, New York City, they're doing a record release party for 24 Karat Magic. This is the album that had, Finesse, the one with Cardi B, 24 Karat Magic, all kinds of hits. And I get invited to go to hear it. And Bruno's going to be there, and he's going to play the whole record. Day before I'm going to New York, I get a call from Andrea again, from Atlantic. She says, hey, just want to give you the heads up. Bruno was just in my office. We were talking about the strategy for the release of the record next week. Last thing he said before he left my office was, oh yeah, is Mike Mulaney going to be at the event tomorrow? Now I am in full-fledged panic. I go to New York, and I'm sweating it out. I get into your place. It's a beautiful place, Tao in New York City. Beautiful place. They have great salmon, by the way. And everyone's waiting to hear. It's one of the nice things about going to these events. They take good care of you. And I walk in, and Julie Greenwald's here, the president of Atlantic Records. She sees me and says, oh, you did come. All right, I'm going to go tell Bruno you're here. And at this point, I'm freaking out. I'm thinking, they're just messing with me at this point. Well, Bruno comes out and he plays his whole record, and I think it's a masterpiece. I'm thrilled. I'm sitting right up front. I'm dancing along. It's great. So everyone gets in line for their opportunity to just take a photo with Bruno. Julie comes back over to me and says, Bruno wants you first in line. So at this point, I'm like, oh. So I grab a friend of mine, big guy, runs an R&B station. I say, hey, can you come back there with me? He's like, no, you made your bed. You're sleeping in it. So here I am at the front of the line, and at this point, my heart is beating through my chest. I'm terrified. Now, Bruno is not a big guy. I'm 5'7". Bruno's about my height. So we walk into the room, and now this is a room backstage, and there are two entrances, one here, one here. You go in this door, you meet him, you come out this door. They walk me in, and they say, Bruno, this is Mike Mulaney. Bruno turns around and says, so you're the guy. And there are curtains on either side, and he says, boys, close the curtains. No, I said, Bruno's not a big guy. His 4 bodyguards, 6'4", they look like offensive linemen for the New England Patriots. These are big guys. At this point, I've never been more scared. And there is Bruno. By the way, great-looking guy, perfect skin. I mean, it's just as cool as you imagine he looks. And he comes up to me, gets right in about 3 inches from my face, looks at me and says, so you're telling people about my music, huh? And I'm thinking, all right, here comes the left. Or is it going to be the right? He's going to take a swing. He looks at me, tries to give me a tough look, takes a step back, laughs, and says, I'm messing with you, Mike, but please, I want to let you know something. When I create music, it's like a child. And I work so hard on it, and it should be my opportunity to introduce my child to the world. And you took that away from me on Uptown Funk. I'm glad that my fans love you. I'm glad they follow you. But do me a favor, promise me you will never say anything about my music again until I say it first. And I say, Bruno, no problem. No problem at all. He then grabbed me and took a photo with me, and that was the moment. Now, the reason I bring that up is because I have that photo. And I want to show you what fear in someone's eyes looks like. Can you see this? Ah! I am scared to death. And that was the night met and almost got my butt kicked by Bruno Mars. Thank you.
So Lori Grandy is next, and I'm crazy about her because she's awesome. And listeners were crazy about her when she hosted the morning show with JW, on WKLB radio for 13 years. Morning radio is a tough, tough game. And to survive and thrive is the tops in radio. She helped build a dynasty at that radio station that was heard around the country and around the world because they put Boston on the map for country radio, winning awards, beating stations in places like, Nashville and all those other places you just assume are the country radio meccas. Country Boston. Boston country. You better believe it. On a serious note, revealing her MS on the air was not only incredibly brave and inspiring, but it was really difficult, and I watched from the sidelines with such admiration because I watched her rock the stage at an MS benefit with other women, and the video is up if you care to see it. It's the National MS Society, New England. For over 20 years, Lori has been part of the Boston radio world. She does it all: traffic, music, news. I adore her because when I first did a benefit with the folks at ZoomX for the kids in East Boston, the first person to say yes, I didn't even finish the sentence. Lori, can you? Yes, I'll be there. That's the kind of person she is. Lori Grandy, everybody.
You know, I was listening to all these great stories, and I was thinking, I should have said, I should have told a story about, interviewing Taylor Swift or Tim McGraw or Kenny Chesney or Eartha Kitt. But no, this is all about me. And it's just, I didn't come into radio through the music part of it. I came into it because I was a natural sidekick. Whenever people were talking about things, I'd be like, me and groceries, don't get me going. I would just kind of get in on other people's conversations all the time. You go, girl, yeah. So it's been fun. I've been a sidekick, a co-hostery. That's what I do. The news, the traffic. I'm right in there to buck up the main person. But so I want to tell you a story about something that I had never done on the air before in my many years on the air. This particular morning, I talked a lot about my family on the air. I didn't mind at all telling their secrets. My parents, my sister, my brother, and it was so interesting when you go out and see people at an event and they would say, "Hey, how's that rash?" Or, "Did your sister's cat come home?" And, it's funny because you're in a room, actually, on the radio. You're just in a room with one other person or two other people, so you just feel like you're just talking to that person. Not like 100,000 people can hear you. So when they say stuff like that, you're like, oh yeah, I said that. So this morning, I had gone through a lot of bad relationships because I was divorced for 14 years, and I just happened to, go online. Anyway, it was a lot of times I'd be on the air in the morning, and I'd be underneath the desk in between newscasts going, "Mom, I know I lent him $5,000, but he said he loved me. And now I'm not attractive to him anymore, and he's not calling me," or, whatever it was. And she would say to me, "No matter what, dry your eyes, get back on the radio." And I'm really glad she did that, because if she had coddled me, I would have been in a ball, like just rocking in the corner. So she was always like, just get back on the radio. So I had one guy who, I was going out with him for a while, and I said, "Mom, he was out on my patio last night." The problem is I lived on the 8th floor at the time, so my nieces made up a song about him up on the rooftop, Tim, Tim, Tim. Anyway, so there was this particular morning, I decided that I was going to say what I wanted, because I read The Secret, and I know that, I'm putting it out into the universe, and, I know, I had stopped sleeping in the middle of my queen bed because The Secret said, if you're, leaving room for somebody else, so I'd be like over on the side waiting. So that morning I decided that I would say, I'm putting out my shingle again. That's exactly what I said. I'm putting the shingle out there again because I'm looking for another relationship. I'm ready for it. And of course, at the time, I'm just telling my partner, JW, I'm just telling him that. But I'm telling a lot of people that as well. So it's out there, and that night I went to do my appearance at the Sylvan Street Grill, which we did country nights there in Salisbury and Peabody, and it was so fun. It was wonderful because I couldn't ever fill a ballroom or a stadium, but I could fill a patio. So, the nice thing was when people would come, there wouldn't be enough room for people to sit down. So I'd say, would you mind sitting with these two people over here? And the cool thing is that they would become friends, and next time they would come together. So it was just a lot of fun. And my parents would come every time because I'm a child. But they were their own little celebrities themselves because they would come in, they'd be like, hey, Mother Teresa, special ed, because I was always talking about them on the radio. And of course, if I was upset about anything, my mother would say, dry your eyes, get back on the patio, radio, patio, whatever, just dry your eyes and get back out there. So that night, a fella comes up to me with a bunch of black-eyed Susans, and he says, I heard you this morning. And I said, well, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate that. I thought, that's nice. And he went, no, I heard you. I heard you say you're putting your shingle out. And I thought, why not me? Why can't I be that guy? And I was like, psycho! I'm like, whoa, universe, back off. So I thought, I have a stalker, and that's fun. But my mother was there that night, and she was the one who actually thought he was a pretty good guy and thought he was interesting and thought he was a strong guy. And I thought, well, if I think the world of her, so whatever she says, okay, maybe she's right. So I kind of got used to this guy, and he grew on me like a carbuncle or a barnacle. And I'm happy to say that we've been married for 1.5 years now. And of course, he's here. He's my stalker. So anyway, I think that my mother knew something because she knew I needed to have this strong, wonderful person in my life because she just passed away. And she was completely healthy. We went to see Cinderella in Boston one day. The next day, she had a stroke and she was gone. And I would not have wanted to bear this without him at all. And so even now, when I go on the air in the morning and I'm in my studio, and I just want to talk to her so much, I just want to talk to her one more time, I can hear her say, dry your eyes and get back on the radio. The end.
So before we get started, I just wanted to give you a little piece of advice, a little skill I picked up along the way. I was a talk show host for a few years. I did radio, and then I was a talk show host after I had my music career. And so I was on RKO, and I did 3 different air shifts under 3 different owners in 3 years. That was really destined to succeed? Probably not. And it didn't. Unhappy ending to that story. But anyway, I learned a lot of things about how to, in soft terms, manipulate conversations, dodge, evade, or just guide. So what would happen is I would interview, pretty prominent people, newsworthy people, and then friends and relatives would go, hey, Ty, what about X? And for a while there, we were on a roll. Hey, Ty, what about Mike Dukakis? What's up with Dukakis? What's up with him? And I'd say, really nice guy. How about them Celtics? And then that was the transition. Pretty smooth, huh? A couple of years later, John Kerry decides to run for president. Hey, Ty, John Kerry, what's he like? I mean, you interviewed him. What's John Kerry like? Really nice guy. Bruins playing tonight? Boom, out of it. Mitt Romney. I interviewed him twice. Shook his hand, stood there, looked him in the eye, sat up straight, Mitt Romney, what's that guy like? I mean, Utah, he's Mormon. I don't know, what's he like? Mitt Romney, really nice guy. Patriots are on fire this year. The best thing about this town is we have the greatest distractions, am I right? Let's hear it. Even when we don't win, people are talking about us. And we win a lot. Pretty nice. So, we're going to start out the second half with Henry Farini. He's usually playing the role of the man behind the curtain. Please welcome Fishtail's co-producer, Henry Farini.
Thank you, everyone. I guess you're not supposed to pull your pants up in front of everyone, but they're coming down. So, I'm going to tell a story about a radio station, the only radio station that was ever broadcast from our city. So, everybody who's been here for a while knows that it's our friend Simon. But this is not the story that my good friend Kenny told in this spot last October. This is about after Simon Geller left Gloucester. And with this film that I did with him, I interviewed him once and I asked him, Simon, how long have you lived in Gloucester? And he said, 24 years. 23 years too long. And that is what Simon Geller was like. But he was a lovable curmudgeon. Anyhow, my story starts in 1989. This is a few months after Simon sold his station, and he left town. And what happened was I was driving down Maplewood Avenue next to the car wash, and I look up onto the second story of the car wash, and Charlie Works, the guy who runs the car wash, had this big reel-to-reel tape recorder in his hands, and he chucked it into this dumpster. And I knew exactly what was happening because this was Simon's last station, and I knew that he had split like a few months ago, and that Charlie was cleaning out his station. So I pulled the car in, I yelled up to him, Charlie, can I come up and check out the place? And he said, sure, take whatever you want. He was getting rid of everything. I walked up, I looked in the place, it was like a bomb went off, and I got really depressed because here's this guy, he spent his whole life in Gloucester, eking out the meager living, and, he provided this music to so many people, just lying in his little rat hole, really, playing this magnificent music. Anyhow, I was depressed, and I was going to walk out, and I walked past a closet, and it was closed, so I guess I had to open it. And I started to open it, and I could hear like, no, no, nee, no, 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 and I opened it up, and the music's faded out. But there in this closet was this magnificently arranged library of all of Simon Geller's master tapes, 15-inch reels, 7-inch reels, cassettes, records, all of his programming that when he transferred over from the records that Mrs. Pett gave him years ago, he put them all onto tape. And when he went out, so now he had 3 hours that he didn't have to change a record. So I showed it to Charlie, and he said, are these going? He said, your treasure is my trash. Please take them. So I put them into my car, and I brought them back to the house. And as I said, this was '89. And I put them in the basement. And I thought I'd have a couple interns or something digitize them, and I'd get a few hours, and I would do something with them. Well, cut to 2015. All right, so now it's 26 years later. I haven't done one thing with those tapes. 26 years, they've been moldering in my basement, getting worse and worse shape. And it sort of, I was there to save them, and now I was causing them their death, So it pained me, but then I got a phone call. I got this phone call from Ohio. The guy's name was Ken Philpott. And Ken had bought a VHS copy of the film, back when it was released. And he wanted a DVD now because it was 2015 and his VHS recorder no longer worked. And I got to talking with him. He was telling me about how he met Geller. And you don't find a lot of people outside of Cape Ann that knew him. So he told me that he was in the broadcasting business and he used to try to tune in Geller's station all the time because he found him to be a fascinating character, but it would always fade out. And he got so tuned into listening to him that he built a 40-foot tower and he aimed it at Gloucester so that he could hear Simon Geller whenever he wanted. And I thought, wow, I wish I had him in the movie. But and then he's, because he's in the broadcasting biz, so he could build that stuff. And his son was like a computer guy, and his son told me that Simon Geller was the soundtrack to his childhood. So this is a family that was very, very with Simon Geller, and I knew I had to tell him about his library, that it was in my basement. And I told him about that, and he said, Henry, my son and I do projects like this where we digitize stuff. Not huge projects like this, but smaller ones. And, let me see if he wants to do this with me, because if he does want to do this with me, then we're going to take on this project. So he calls up Bob and Lowell, and Bob agrees. And we're off to the races. So months later, after hundreds of hours of touching this quarter-inch magnetic tape, splicing, baking it, cleaning it, processing it, equalizing it, all this stuff in order to get it into a form where it could be put on a hard drive. And after months of this, the Phoenix rose, and Bob and Ken delivered to me 700 hours of Simon Geller's music on a loop. 700 hours. Now, some people would say, well, I'd only like to listen to an hour of it, but, I felt differently. Anyhow, so we have that, and if anybody's interested in listening to old Simon, all you have to do is go to wvca.com and click on listen. And, Joe Garland used to call Simon Geller's station an island of tranquility in a sea of soul-destroying sameness. So if you need a little bit of that, send your donations to WVCA, the voice of Cape Ann, Gloucester, Massachusetts. And thank you for supporting Fishtails.
Thanks, Henry. Thank you. Before we bring on the next speaker, I want to recognize Bob Nelson. Bob, just wave to everybody. Bob Nelson has been on WMWM, Salem State's radio station, since 1981. He's on tomorrow at noon. He cannot be stopped. I love it. Awesome. So now I'm going to introduce you to somebody who is also a north of Boston radio legend and been doing it since he was 13 years old. And by it, I mean DJing, hosting, emceeing, entertaining, broadcasting, you name it. Chris Culkeen is a one-man army, and he is here tonight. WESX, WMLO, WFNX, WRKO, WBZ. I just can't keep going on here. It's unbelievable. Not yet. You're going to like this one. traffic in Boston is synonymous with him, not the other way around. Some people got it. 3,000 events over the years, more weddings than anyone I know of emceeing. One night, Chris and I, remember the Christmas party we did together? We drove into the Ted Williams Tunnel when no one was supposed to. And lived to tell the story. Didn't we both think we were going to get shot at or something? Like, we're driving through the Ted Williams Tunnel, there's signs everywhere, no cars. At that time, we lived to tell. When James Brown passed away, he became the hardest working man in show business. Chris Culkeen, Monday night, Endicott Grill in Danvers, his friendly feud night. Tuesday night, Brown Dog in Ipswich. Wednesday night, Wardhurst in Peabody. Thursday night, Dockside in Wakefield. Thank the Lord it's Friday because we got him. Chris Culkeen.
Ty, thank you very much. It's great to be here and to see some of my great friends from this business for so many years, especially Lori. We go way, way back. And I do take one exception to what Lori said in her talk about being a natural sidekick. Lori, you are the star, honey. You are the best. You are awesome. So Ty, as Ty said, I started out as a kid, but I came into doing traffic, as many people get into their thing in this business sort of by mistake. It was a job that I was offered, and I said yes. That was in 1988, and I got to fly in a helicopter. And I thought, well, how can I say no to that? The coolest job. Has anyone ever flown in a helicopter, by the way? If you haven't, think of the coolest thing you've ever done. Multiply it by 10, and you're getting close to how it feels to be in a helicopter. And I got to do that for about 10 years in both a helicopter and a fixed-wing aircraft, and twice a day for about 6 hours a day. And the only downside is I had to talk to people like Ty every morning. But it was great, a great experience to be a part of. And there were so many great times when we would fly up. In fact, one of my favorite times, if we had some extra time, we'd fly up here. We'd go up over Cape Ann. It is so beautiful. If it's beautiful from the ground, you should see it from above. It is so gorgeous. We'd go down, one of my favorites was coming down the Essex River in an airplane, low altitude, sunset in the fall. It is breathtaking. But there was one night that wasn't as nice as those other nights. This was in 1996. I had been flying for about 8 years at the time, and boy, were my arms tired. I had to. I'm sorry. At that time, I had been reporting for WFNX and several other stations, and one in New Hampshire as well. So we were going up 93. We're at 93 and 495. And all of a sudden, we heard, my pilot and I, heard a loud bang, which if you've ever flown in a commercial plane and you've heard any noise, it's a little unsettling. When you're in a Cessna 182 that normally seats 4 people, and you hear a loud bang and, say, a flash coming out of the exhaust of the engine, it's a little more than disturbing. It is totally frightening. But then, as the propeller continues to move, then come to a stop, and you're looking at the back of a perfectly still propeller, and you're 1,500 feet in the air. You don't know what you're going to do. At the time, I had pretty much finished my reports for the night, but we had a control, we called it our base of operations, who I would talk with to tell them, give them the information. They would give me information for when I would go on the air. I was talking with Matt Phipps, who was another famous name you probably heard here. He was on the river for many years in BOS. I was speaking with him, and he said, "Hey, Chris, we got a really bad crash up on 495 at Route 3. Now, I was 495 at Route 93 at the time. I said, "We'll just shoot right up 495 and take a look." 2 minutes later was the bang, the flash, and the stall. So my response as I was talking to Matt was, "Oh my God." right? And he said, oh, is it a really bad accident? And I said, no, we're not there. We're not going to get there. My pilot, his name was Tom Hott, who flies for Southwest these days. No, JetBlue. I'm sorry, JetBlue. He flies for JetBlue. Was fairly new pilot for me. He's about 24, 25 years old. Was incredible. He went right into training mode, calling out Mayday, calling out our location. I was talking to our base, trying to tell them where we were. We continued on. We turned, knowing that, well, maybe you could land on the highway, right? But no. It's November, it's dark, and it's rush hour. There's no room on the road for you. So there's a pond over here and a parking lot. And there's woods over here and a parking lot. And he decided to go to the trees, which at the time I thought, are you out of your mind? So we're making it over the trees. We keep descending. I keep giving updates. The propeller's not coming back on. We're gliding at this point. And I was told later that at 1,500 feet, the Cessna 182 has about a mile of glide time, which is not a whole lot of distance. So we make it over the trees. We're almost there at the parking lot. And then you don't just go like gradually down like this. No, you drop like a rock out of the sky. And we did. But we were over those trees the way that Tom decided to go. And those trees acted like a cushion. They broke our fall. So rather than smashing into the ground, and somebody being here tonight talking about the memory of Chris Culkeen, I'm still standing here. We fell down, the plane fell through those trees, and later they gave me a little gift. This was the nose cone of the propeller. That was about maybe an inch from the ground. This was probably from one of the tree branches that it hit on the way down. Now, the story doesn't quite end there. We were okay, checked everything okay. I said my Hail Marys like the good 12-year Catholic education boy I am. On our way down, we get out of the plane, and then we thought, okay, well, we can just walk over to that parking lot that was 50 feet from us. Oh, no, that's right. That parking lot is Raytheon, and there's a 12-foot razor wire fence around the 2-mile perimeter of the plant. So we began our walk around. We finally make it to the guard shack, and they let us in. A state trooper arrives. We call everybody, let them know we're okay. I call home. Of course, my lovely bride who is here. We had 3 children at the time, 6, 5, and 3, and 6, 5, and 2. And shock, nobody answered the phone. Why would they answer the phone? Because it's dinner time. She's getting them ready for bath, and of course, can't find the handset of the phone, because back when we actually had house phones, do you guys remember what these were? When you had a phone in your house that was dedicated in the house? Couldn't find that handset, and the message went off, and I said, Irene, I'm okay. Just want to let you know I'm fine. I'll talk to you later. I get off the phone. Of course, I haven't been able to talk to the people back at my base. The last thing they heard me say was, we're hitting trees now. And that's when the radio went dead. 45 minutes had gone by. They have no idea in Boston what has happened to us. Irene hears the message and calls, and poor Matt Phipps to this day still turns white when we talk about this story, because he had no idea what to tell my wife when she calls and say, what's going on with Chris? He said that he's okay, but he couldn't tell me what was going on. So in the end, I was fine. Tom was fine. That's all that's left of the plane. We get home, and it's a frenzy. Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 7, 25, everybody wants to come to the house to talk to me, what it was like to survive a plane crash. We went to bed that night. Next morning, we get up as we always do. I didn't go to work that day. Don't know why. Got the little kids off to go to school. as we're going out to the car, one of our neighbors, who was, remember Mrs. Kravitz? Was it Dick Van Dyke? Was that? No. Bewitched, thank you. She had to know everything, right? Well, this neighbor of ours made Mrs. Kravitz look like a woman who kept to herself, okay? She had to know everything. It must have been killing her the night before to find out what was going on at the old Culkeen Ranch that night. Well, she came over to us that morning as we were getting the kids in their car seats and tying them in, and she said, "What was going on last night? We saw all the news trucks. We thought you won the lottery." So, whenever I look at this nose cone from that plane, I remember that I actually did win the lottery that night, and my winning ticket number was the tail number of that plane, November 4926 Gulf, and this is my lucky charm. Thanks so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of the night.
So another Chris is here, Chris Kennedy. He was the very first person that I thought of when they asked me to host this evening because he owes me money. Chris found himself, like Bob Nelson, at WMWM at Salem State on their college radio station. From there, he scooted down the coast a little bit to Central Square Lynn, the hot spot that it is, and WFNX radio. He was an intern, and then we weaseled him onto the salary, I don't know how, the stream of money that was everywhere at FNX, said no one. And so Chris actually produced the Morning Guy Ty show for many years. You say, what does a producer do anyway? Well, I bought jokes from him. Remember, $1 a piece? Some of them were worth $1, some of them were worth much more. $2.
Start writing again.
So what Chris did is he simply gave me the confidence to go on the air every day and compete against the big boys, the big guns. Maddie in the Morning on KISS, Charles Lacrodera on BCN, Howard Stern, and all the others. And every day I would be beaten in the ratings by Maddie in the Morning on KISS, Charles Lacrodera on BCN, you know the rest of the story. But Chris is the best guy in town. He went to BOS and ROR after that. He now is hosting a night at Notch Brewing coming up on Tuesday the 28th, and it's like a former FNX alum and people who love WFNX night, and it all benefits Children's Hospital. So if you're around Salem and you want to come out for a good cause, that'd be a good night, Tuesday the 28th. Where is he? Chris Kennedy. Come on out.
Thank you. So I'm disappointed, Ty. Radio Days right there, and you just never said the line that everybody knows from the movie, which I'm not even going to say it now, because he's a ventriloquist on the radio. How do you know he's not moving his lips? Come on. It was right there for you the whole time. So my story is a little bit different from the stories that we've heard. Are you ready for some debauchery? Are you ready for some thievery, thuggery? Some scary, scary stories. Sexual depravity in Central Square Lynn in the middle of the night in the 90s. Central Square Lynn was a very unique place. If you were there in the daytime, it was sketchy as hell and could scare the crap out of you. If you were there at night, we took it to an art form. So this one particular enchanted evening, I'm looking out over the perch in the second floor at 25 Exchange Street and looking down where, you have all kinds of characters gathered across the street, usually on, it's right where the bus station is. And so you would have occasional drug dealers. You'd have, fights breaking out down around the corner, so you'd have police cruisers coming in from all different angles. You'd have the occasional prostitute standing there, flashing up 20 fingers to me, saying, $20, come on down, and I'd say no. And then it would be $10, and I'd say no. And then it would be $5, and I'd say no. So anyway, on this one night, The square was dead silent. There was nothing going on. And it just kind of felt eerie. It just felt weird. And all of a sudden, this light flashes in the studio that signals that someone's at the front door. Now, as Ty pointed out, FNX spared no expense. So, there was no amazing plexiglass to prevent people from coming in. There was no video conferencing or video that would shoot to FBI. We had a $10 intercom system from Radio Shack. That was the entire safety of the place. So I tried really hard to sound intimidating when I said, hello, because I'm in the building all by myself. So the guy on the other end says, yeah, do you live at such and such Essex Street in Salem? Crap, now they know where I live. So I again said, why would you ask that? And he said, well, I recognized your car, and I live upstairs from you, and I was hoping you could give me a ride home. And I said, what are you doing in Central Square in the middle of the night? And he said, I got mugged. And I said, you got mugged? And by now, the voice is starting to sound familiar to me. This was a very interesting looking guy. I would say that, from the Lord of the Rings, Sam, who's Frodo's best friend, I'm pretty sure that the character was like this guy was the prototype for that character. So anyway, I decided to let him in. I start to run downstairs, and I check and make sure it is indeed him. I get to the door, and he's wearing nothing but a pair of boxers. And so I said, okay, come on in. We come upstairs. I run into the studio. He's thanking me profusely the whole way up the stairs, just saying, oh my God, I can't believe you. Thank you so much. You've saved my life. I've been roaming around Central Square, and then I saw your car, and thank you. I said, so you got mugged? And he said, well, not so much mugged. I got rolled. And I'm thinking, who says rolled in 1993? This isn't an episode of Kojak. I mean, really. So I said, how did you get rolled? What happened? And he said, well, I work at Kelly's Roast Beef in Revere, and I'm hanging out with my buddies, and we decided to go drinking afterwards. So we went to a bar in Lynn, and I met these two wicked hot chicks. And things are going really well with them at the bar. So we decided to go to the beach. And I tried to convince them to go skinny dipping with me. And they said, you go first. So he did. And he's splashing around in the water. And he said, I'm bouncing around in the water, just having a good time. And I turn and look, and I see them running down the beach. So I climb out of the water and go to chase after them, only to realize they only left me my boxers. He said, they got my car keys, they got my wallet. What am I gonna do? And I said, well, if they got your wallet, you should call the cops. And he's like, I can't, I had 2 joints in there. Again, 1993. So anyway, he says, can you give me a ride home? And I said, I'm on the air until 6. You're gonna have to hang out. And he said, all right, well, can I go crash on the couch? Well, I knew that there was a morning show that was gonna be coming in a little bit. And this guy in his boxers on the couch was probably not a good idea. So I went to my locker, and I just grabbed the only T-shirt that I had there, and it was from the band Fret Blanket, and I threw it to him, and he put it on. And I wasn't really thinking about Fret Blanket. The song that they were pushing was a song called Twisted. And across his chest when he put the shirt on was a quote from the lyrics of that song. And it said, "Take my clothes off and drag me to the sea." Thank you.
It's been a good night, right? It's really been a good night. I want to thank Maureen Aylward and Lynn McKenzie for roping us all into this year. We're very grateful. Our last storyteller is Paul Saxman. I know for a fact that Maureen Aylward has dubbed him the coolest man she has ever known, and her favorite boss of all time. High praise indeed. Please welcome former publisher of Musician Magazine, Paul Saxman.
So I'm listening to everyone tonight, and I'm thinking a question that I think we've all asked in our lives. What am I doing here? I was never in radio. I thought I should be in radio. In fact, I still fool professionals who think I should be in radio because I have a radio voice. And the fact of the matter is, I just sound like a radio. I broadcast in my nose, I found out in college, so that wasn't going to be my future. I knew early. I think I used the word, I was thinking about it because the subject was radio and not being in it, but how important radio was in my life. I thought I'd be in radio. I could end up in radio, although I realized my dad, when he got out of the Army, he worked for CBS. And my Uncle Louis told him, screw CBS, forget CBS, they're going nowhere. Small appliances is where it's at. You come with me, we'll sell small appliances. So toasters and radios. So my dad left a broadcast giant to go sell radios in New Jersey. So that was before I was born. I should have realized then that I'm probably not going to succeed in radio with that type of opportunity taken away from me at such an early age. So I grew up in the 60s, and everyone listened to not only the same radios, we listened to the same radio stations, we listened to the same songs. It was really a teenage symphony. It was quite a perfect storm. But I had my transistor, and like every other kid, I listened to it at the beach. In fact, you could just walk anywhere on a beach in those days because everyone was playing the exact same station. So it was just a huge stereo system on the beach. It was wonderful. So I walked the walk. I followed those radios. I remember listening so intently to everything. I mean, this was a time when music, and I'm a music guy, and that's really why I think I might be here. I did spend 35 years in the music business, but more importantly, I'm a music guy. And radio is the thing that turned me into that guy. And I blame it because it's been an addiction and it's been a passion for all of my life. So I listened to transistor radios like all the kids, and we jotted down all the top 100 hits every New Year's Eve. We took time with it, and we followed it, and we just spent our day listening to the radio. It wasn't quite the old fireside chats, but it was a new version of it. So my friends and I would listen to the radio, and in high school, someone talked about following your passion and all, and there was an exercise. You had to write down what are you going to be when you grow up. And I don't remember when I wrote it, but I remember seeing a year Mrs. Murphy took it out and showed me what I wrote, and it said DJ, that I wanted to be a DJ. So obviously somewhere in my life I yearned to be in radio, but it just wasn't to be. As I said, I kept getting what I considered thwarted in my approach. So I grew up in Danbury, Connecticut, and WLAD was the radio station in Danbury, Connecticut. It probably still is. And I decided I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get an internship because it's time. And I went in and, I was a proficient student. I thought I was articulate, that I could represent myself. The problem is I did look like I would rob your house at that time of my life. So I probably wasn't the intern they were looking for at WLAD in Danbury, Connecticut. So that's okay. I'm going to persevere. I will continue. So I come to Boston for school, which is how I got here. I went to BU. I went to the School of Public Communications. Again, only upping my chance of being a DJ someday. I'll go to the School of Public Communication. Well, those interesting, just a quick fun fact, Howard Stern was my teaching assistant at Boston University. I was a freshman and he was a senior. Biggest nerd you ever wanted to meet. Certainly didn't inspire me to go into radio, but I was motivated. So I went to TBU, I believe was the station in Boston University, which is a student station. BUR was classical and jazz, it wasn't my thing. So TBU, which only could be heard if you plugged into a certain socket in your dorm room, that was the network that I was going to be featured on. So I took my voice and I went on this station once, and I wanted to see who was up. I did a late night shift, and so I offered, I think, $10, which was like a month's worth of pizza back in the day. I offered $10 to anyone who could call it in. And there was nobody listening. Nobody called. I repeated the number over and over again. I upped it to $20. I just realized I have no audience. This isn't happening. I have to go back a second because I realized in college, besides WLAD, I was thwarted by my dad as well. I was after AM and transistor, like you were talking about the clock radio. When I turned in 1970, I turned 13, and it changed my life. And not because I was bar mitzvahed, but because I got a clock radio for my bar mitzvah. And that clock radio, instead of sleeping with the transistor under my pillow, now I could just set it and I could listen. And one night I'm listening, and WPKN out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, which was the Purple Night Network, I guess, for the University of Bridgeport, but I was told by the cool DJs it was the People's Cosmic Network. So I was listening at all hours of the night to the People's Cosmic Network, and I was listening, and they offered 2 tickets to the Bangladesh concert in New York if I could tell them, if someone could tell them, what does NRBQ stand for? So it's 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I rush to the phone, and my dad rushes right behind me. Are you out of your mind? Are you crazy? It's 3 o'clock in the morning. What are you doing? Dad, don't bother me. I'm dialing. I've got to get through. I know it. I knew that I was going to win it because most people think it's the new rhythm and blues quartet, but in fact it was quintet. And that was going to be my winning ticket to the Bangladesh concert. Well, my dad overruled me and shut the phone down at 3 o'clock in the morning. I did not get to go to see Bangladesh again, thwarted once again in radio. So we get to college, and I do this TBU thing, and that didn't work out. So I'm going to get an internship. And I go to a really cool station, which some of you may remember in Cambridge. It's called WCAS. And WCAS, the coolest thing about it was not only did they play great music, they only ran from sunup to sundown. That was the station, sunup to sundown. Oh, God, how cool is that? I'm going to get that internship. LAD doesn't know what they missed. I'm going to CAS in Cambridge. So I go there, and I meet with a woman named Judith Brackley, who was working there, who is known amongst the radio station people. And once again, just like a repeat, I get shut down. I do not get this internship. This time, though, I get to meet Judith Brackley on the reverse. And about 15, 20 years later, I meet her at a concert that we're co-promoting at the Channel in Boston, and I introduce myself as the person you shut down at radio. She was smart enough to tell me that it's obviously the right decision because look where I ended up, and she would have gotten in the way of my success. And so it was nice to be vindicated on that run. So I figured, okay, I don't get that. I will find one, though. And I ended up at a station at MIT called TBS at the time. WTBS was the college station. And I was going to get involved in their fundraising. Okay, sounds cool, kind of interested. Well, behold, again, thwarted, which is just, the word I have to keep using. So out of the blue, instead of going and doing concerts and all the things that we were talking about in the meetings, Ted Turner comes to the school and buys the call letters from WTBS at MIT. That's the end of my internship. It's over. Before it even got started, I'm once again thwarted. Couldn't get my legs going in radio. I just couldn't get this handle. I did end up writing an entire phony term paper about my internship at WTBS, but I spent about 3 days at WTBS, fundraising before Ted Turner. So I was fortunate. I was told that health services were the future of communication people, and I was communication. I still look like hell, but I was a communicator, and I could cut my hair, and I'll get a job. And they said HMOs need copywriters. This is where the future holds, said my advisor. So I don't know how to get that job exactly, and so I go in the newspaper. I go to the Boston Globe, and I'm looking under Hospital Help Wanted, hoping it'll say internship or first right out of college, starting position with a hospital or an HMO. And it says, music magazine looking for salesman, call Gordon. which brings me to Gloucester. And I figured it's either fate or I'm calling it. I'm just going to call it, see what happens. And I call it, and a woman with a Cockney accent answers the phone, and she said, Musician Magazine? I said, oh my God. I said, where did I call? She said, Gloucester. England? I mean, this is incredible. I had no idea what was going on. This was just all very surreal. But I was invited up, and I got the gig, and I worked with Gordon Baird, a local citizen of Gloucester, a character, I guess is the word we could use. And I became a second lieutenant and ended up becoming the publisher in New York. I went to New York with Billboard. And so because I was with the musician and I was with Billboard, I really had an incredible view of the industry, of radio people, of the artists themselves. As you were mentioning, you meet so many stars along the way, and it was really all very interesting to me. But as I sit back now and I think about it, again, with my voice, what should I have done, or what could I have done? Well, I don't know. I mean, I was never given the chance to really break out and give it my best shot. So this is my debut. This is my tonight. And I just want to mention, there's there's a couple things I want to say. Oh, here's another sport. I was supposed to be on the radio. Charles Laquidara. You mentioned Charles Laquidara. Charles Laquidara used to call people on their birthdays and play games on them. And I had a friend who sent in my name. Paul works for a musician, he's a good guy, it's his birthday. Would you screw with him, as you do on the morning mattress? And so I was living in Sin with my wife, who's now my wife for 32 years, but we were living in Sin in Salem, and I believe, if I remember correctly, you were blow drying your hair, and I was just sleeping, because it's 6:30 in the morning, or 7 o'clock in the morning, and I missed Charles Laquidara's call. And so everybody knew, all my friends, and everyone goes, oh my God, I heard your name all over Charles Laquidara's show this morning. What happened? Again, it just wasn't meant to be. I tried to explain. It's just obviously not meant to be. I missed the phone calls. I missed the opportunities. I was going to say that there are a couple of lines that I thought of as I'm looking back at my life here. And, as I said, this is my opportunity. I did a Fishtails about 5 years ago. And it was in a much smaller room down the road. So the fact that this is my second Fishtail and I'm headlining on a much bigger stage tonight, I think has vindicated the fact that I didn't make it on radio. This is the winnings that I had. So again, I'd like to take advantage of the opportunity. I always, Charles, when I got up here, Boston radio was fantastic. I mean, we had not only WBCN and COZ and commercial rock stations, we had all the college stations going. So it was fantastic, and the music was special. And FM really was. They say they had the commercial. This is your mind, and this is your mind on drugs. This is your mind on AM, and this is your mind on FM. It was that different. This was the world that turned me on. This was John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix. This was fantastic artists. And it was another world. It was a private club, and I felt privileged to be in it. So even though I didn't really get any professional currency out of it, except for being in the music industry and being a record guy and a music fanatic, I always wanted to kind of have a sign-off. And so this, I realize, is my perfect opportunity. And I always loved Charles Laquidara's sign-off, and I never had one of my own because, again, I never had the opportunity to have a radio show. So I'm going to just paraphrase that, and I believe it was something like, if the creek don't rise, and the good Lord's willin', and there ain't no meltdown, we'll do it all over again, another time, another day, another way. And so I'm going to say tonight, this is Paul Saxman, and I'm signing out. Thank you.
That's all we got for you, folks. Thank you for coming out tonight. Safe home.